Good afternoon and namaskar to everyone present here. I welcome you all to the panel discussion on Is Sri Aurobindo's legacy being appropriated and destroyed by the West, based on a soon to be launched path breaking book, The Battle for Consciousness Theory, a response to Ken Wilber's appropriation of Sri Aurobindo's work and other Indian thought. We are privileged to have with us today the authors of this thought provoking work, Shri Rajiv Malhotra ji, who has joined us online, and Ms. Manogna Shastri ji, whose deep insights challenge prevailing narratives and seek to preserve the true essence of Sri Aurobindo's legacy. We also extend a warm welcome to Professor Shri Sharad Joshi ji, the esteemed chairman of Sri Aurobindo Society, Baroda, whose presence enriches this gathering. I would take this opportunity to introduce our first esteemed guest to the gathering, Sri Rajiv Malhotra ji. Sir is a best selling author of 14 major critically acclaimed path breaking books, known for challenging the established wisdom in the fields as diverse and inspiring as civilizations, cross cultural encounters, consciousness, and artificial intelligence. He combines his life journey as a technocrat, an entrepreneur, and a spiritual explorer, formulating new frameworks and paradigms to bring ancient knowledge into the present context. His writings impact intellectuals worldwide and provoke our comfort zones. Over the past half century, Rajiv Ji's work has straddled across the USA and India, and he's equally at home in both places. He heads the Princeton based Infinity Foundation. We welcome you, sir, and we would request you to share your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much. I can now see the wonderful audience sitting there. It's a pleasure. I want to thank Oro University for organizing this, and Hasmukh Ramaji, a dear friend and a fellow traveler in the Sri Aurobindo path. So, I was told that the audience I should not expect have much background on Sri Aurobindo, and so we have a double or triple handicap. First, you need to know about Sri Aurobindo and why he is so important in order to understand the hijacking and controversy and appropriation of his work by some other people. And then once you know that, then we can explain why that is wrong, why that is not correct factually, it's not authentic, and so on. So our book, this book, which we are launching in a few days in Delhi, it's a copy available, but officially not yet launched. This book is called The Battle for Consciousness Theory, a response to Ken Wilber's appropriation of Sri Aurobindo's work and other Indian thought. So when we say consciousness theory, a lot of things come to mind. There are many views on what is consciousness. Some people say it is just matter, it's brain that creates consciousness. Some say that our Advaita tradition, Vedanta tradition, says exactly the opposite, that consciousness is all that there is. In fact, matter is something that comes out later as a result of consciousness, but matter is not what comes first. So, if you look at our tradition, the most complete and most comprehensive and compelling and convincing description of consciousness is the one by Sri Aurobindo. And because he was recent and wrote in English, it's very powerful. And he made a huge impact all over the world. There are people called Aurobindonians, who are all over the world and who've been enriched by his knowledge for the last 100 years, pretty much 100 years. Even though he started many of his major publications around, I would say the second quarter of the around between 1930s and 50s, somewhere around there. So it's about almost a 100-year journey of his published works, major published works. Initially only known in India, but eventually became worldwide. Now, his idea of consciousness has been appropriated by many people in the West. There is Teilhard de Chardin who's Christianized it. There's a there are several other people I won't name, but then there is Ken Wilber. who's become the towering giant, who's taken this knowledge as and turned it into his own. He's in fact copyrighted some of the terms like integral psychology that Sri Aurobindo started, and he became a worldwide figure based on this knowledge, but appropriated, twisted it, distorted it to make it look like his own original knowledge. And that's what this story is about. Now, I have been for 30, 35 years since I took early retirement from the tech industry. I was a tech entrepreneur. And in my early 40s, I took retirement because I had some spiritual experiences. I decided that I want to pursue them rather than make more money and understand myself, understand the spiritual perspectives on the world. Uh, as I got into that and started my Infinity Foundation to do that work, I became very close to the Pondicherry ashram and Auroville, which is a place set up to pursue the ideas of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, bring them into the modern world. So I became very involved there, and I was developing a theory on how the many Westerners take Indian ideas, learn them, understand them with great respect, but later they change their mind and they call it their own. First, they are following a guru, or they got a Hindu name also, and they're following, certain paths, one of our traditional paths. Could be Sri Aurobindo, could be Shaivism, could be Vaishnavism, could be ISKCON, could be, there are so many gurus over there. But after a while, the ego, the arrogance says, hey, you know what? I can outsmart that. Why do I need to follow somebody? I'll start my own. And many Westerners, many Western readers, many Western followers prefer that the knowledge come from another Westerner rather than from an Indian, because there's a racism. There is a racism. How can an Indian be more knowledgeable and advanced and evolved than us? We are supposedly the most advanced people in the world. So there's a market, there's a demand for a white person to take over that knowledge and become the new guru. So that's what I call the U-turn theory. U-turn meaning people who have understood knowledge from the Indian sources. Then they made a U-turn and they started calling it their own and started disparaging the Indian sources, started actually abusing them and talking down and saying that they're inferior and finding flaws and so on. That's the U-turn theory. And then many Indians adopt this Western idea, thinking it's come from the West, thinking that we are inferior and they have brought us this knowledge. Actually, the West is selling us back our own knowledge, which they've taken from us in many cases. Not in all cases, but in many cases, and including this one. So I was studying this U-turn theory, and then I developed another theory called digestion. Digestion is how it's not just a few individuals who do this, but whole culture, whole civilization is created in the Western world based on something they got from India. Like Jungian thought. So much of Indian knowledge got recharacterized as Jungian knowledge. This Wilberism, Ken Wilber business is also a digested version of Sri Aurobindo's thoughts, and Buddhism also in it. And Kashmir Shaivism is also part of it. So this digestion is a very complex theory. I've been developing a book called U-turn theory for 25 years. It's multiple volumes now, and also theory of digestion, another multiple volumes. So when I was doing my work in Pondicherry and Auroville, we were giving many grants there. We were giving grants of over 100,000 a year for Auroville village development and various projects like that. And I got to know many friends there. That is when I came across this Ken Wilber is appropriating this knowledge, and the people who are followers of Sri Aurobindo either don't know or don't care. This is very strange. And since then, I found this is a characteristic of Indians that, the idea is that when there's a problem, they'll pretend they don't know, there is no problem, everything is fine, great, because they don't want to deal with it. They don't want to be responsible. They don't want to actually do something. So it's an easy way out is to pretend that they don't know, there's nothing wrong. So Ken Wilber was having a good time appropriating Indian knowledge. In fact, many Indians helping him. Some of those people still live in Auroville, some of the very elderly people. They were welcoming Ken Wilber as a great hero. In fact, saying that maybe we should join his movement. Instead of being loyal to their own guru, which is Sri Aurobindo, they were talking about switching sides and becoming loyal to the Ken Wilber side. This is how horrible I found it was. So I wanted some help. I wanted to find out who's going to help me, because after all, I cannot do all this by myself. I have to. So I tried getting help from people, but help was not available from Aurobindonians. Then I tried to give grants and pay money to people who would come and help me out. Even then, so I started doing this on my own because I was encouraged by some very senior people. K.D. Setna, who was in his 90s, he lived to be 106. He was at that time on a wheelchair in his 90s, considered a stalwart of the Sri Aurobindo movement, one of the persons, the oldest surviving persons from Sri Aurobindo's time. He encouraged me. He was so happy that I'm doing this. He said, he inspired me, gave me a lot of pointers, leads. I started doing this work. Then there was a Kirit Joshi, a very eminent man in the Gujarat Education Ministry. He was under Indira Gandhi, Education Minister, a very eminent man and quite well known in the Aurobindo circles. He encouraged me. He said, you are the right person. You can do all this. And you have the clarity, you have the courage to go do it. And then there was a ex-president of Singapore, Devan Nair. He was extremely happy that I'm doing this. So we started championing this project, that this project needs to be done, not only in India, but all over in Western countries. I would go wherever they were discussing Sri Aurobindo or Ken Wilber. I would go and present all this, create a big splash. People thought this guy is very controversial. But I had this idea that this project needs to be done. And the project, which is in this book, basically all what we are doing is we are taking what Sri Aurobindo wrote, and then we are comparing it with what Ken Wilber has said, and we're putting them side by side sometimes. So there are like for example, sometimes what we'll do is we'll have a column. I'll show you one of these tables. So I think you can't probably see it, but you can get an idea. On the left side, we are showing what Sri Aurobindo wrote, and on the right side, we are comparing it with what Ken Wilber wrote, and we are showing that he's basically copied some of these ideas. Some of them he distorted them. He did not understand correctly. Some of them he tried to say that his idea is better, but it's not authentic. The most important thing to remember in this is the discoveries of a rishi are not based on reading somebody else, but on experience. The rishi is somebody who has his own personal experience, and based on that experience, he then comes out and writes for other people. But he has understood it because he has experienced it directly. Ken Wilber never claimed that he had any such experience when he started. He was very clear that he's a bookworm. He's a very sharp reader, reads a lot, copy paste here and there, and he's taking information from many sources, putting it together like a librarian. So he came up with a Western idea of consciousness theory based on many thinkers, combining this fellow, that fellow, from ancient Greece, from modern America, from Europe, many kind of people, and make a hodgepodge copy paste out of it. That based on his experience, and that's a difference. When it's not based on any person's own experience, but based on a lot of reading here and there and putting it together, it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. And he cannot describe higher states of consciousness because he never experienced them. So this is what this book is about. Now you might wonder, why is it so important? First of all, consciousness theory has become a major topic of study internationally, and they have bypassed and superseded Sri Aurobindo in the mainstream American circles, Western circles. He is considered like one of the many kind of second tier characters. The top tier are all Westerners. So that's troubling to me. It should trouble you also. You should be concerned that this is going on. But there's another reason. And the other reason is the second part of my interest is in artificial intelligence. I was a tech engineer, tech developer, then became an entrepreneur and started many companies. So I have this background. I know that AI is very important now. And I've written books on AI also. And AI depends on this whole idea of advanced intelligence. And some people say that there will be a turning point, called singularity, at which point AI will become conscious. The machines, the robots will become conscious. So obviously they need to have a theory of consciousness, because if the machines are going to become conscious, they need to understand what is consciousness. And this idea of consciousness theory has become very important because of AI also. It was important for spiritual reasons. Now it's important for both spiritual reasons and also machine learning and AI. People want to know whether machine can ever become conscious or not. So this is why having the correct theory is important. And this is how the Indian theories can play a role in the future. And we Indians should understand our theory, our tradition, our legacy, champion it, and be able to project it as something part of our Bharatiya culture, because it's becoming very relevant. And we don't want to be thrown out and bypassed and some other people taking this knowledge. So that's the reason I wrote this. And because the audience is not very sort of the Sri Aurobindo oriented experts, I did not want to get into the more details. I think my co-author Manogna will do that. Manogna has worked in our organization for about a decade or so. I'm very glad we hired her. And then after a while, when I discovered that she's also an Aurobindo follower, and my project had been going on for a quarter century, I said, you can help me out, and she did. So here we are. And with that, I will conclude my remarks. Thank you very much, and I'll hand you back to the moderator.
Thank you so much, sir, for your thought provoking speech. And thank you for sharing a new perspective on Sri Aurobindo's legacy. We are looking forward to reading your insights. Our next guest is Ms. Mahogna Shastri, who has co authored this path breaking book with Sri Rajiv Malhotra ji. Ma'am is an MSc from the Indian Institute of Astrophysics with a strong background in theoretical physics and mathematics. She is currently team leader research at Infinity Foundation India. Her research spans astrophysics, Indology focused on chronology and desacralization, civilizational studies, consciousness studies focused on Sri Aurobindo, sustainability and education. She brings scientific rigor to analysis of civilizational studies and rethinking of historical constructs from non-dominant viewpoints. Her work has been published in several peer-reviewed journals and presented at conferences. Ma'am is a passionate sustainability practitioner and in her previous role focused on pedagogies of learning and inquiry. I would request Associated Dean Academics Dr. Monica Suri to please welcome and felicitate ma'am.
My warm regards to Shri Hasmukh Ramaji, Professor Sharad Joshi ji, and of course, it's always a huge boost to have my mentor Shri Rajiv ji join me, and fellow professors and students who have gathered here today. Namaste. It is an honor for me to speak at the Auro University, given how it is founded and inspired by the principles and vision of Shri Aurobindo and the Mother. The topic of our session today is Sri Aurobindo's legacy being appropriated and destroyed by the West. Now, this topic requires us to understand factors, mechanisms, and players at work in the intellectual Kurukshetra that we find ourselves today. Given that the audience primarily here comprises of students and faculty, I'm sure that the concept of a school of thought finds understanding, right? So when we refer to a school of thought in any domain, be it economics or management, law, science, philosophy, any of these, what we refer to are unique perspectives that help frame complex ideas and drive discussions and debates in the field and contribute to them uniquely. That is what a school of thought does. For example, when we say classical economics, that's a school of thought. Liberalism, conservatism, these are political schools of thought. Darwinism is an evolutionary school of thought. And we have so many. For a civilizational state such as ours, Bharata, schools of thought have existed since millennia across numerous domains. And they have in fact survived very, very challenging circumstances. Bharata stands out on the global stage, not only because it has numerous schools of thought encompassing all walks of man's life, but because each of these is connected to one another as an integrally unified whole, right? So this creates a very complex and beautiful superstructure, which at the same time has very deep roots. So, on one hand, we have the smallest of man's acts, which have been studied and perfected. And on the other hand, we've had complex questions, very fundamental questions, addressing man's very existence, right? Each of these have been studied and are fulfilled to remarkable extent by our ancestors and the rishis. Putting all of this together is what makes the Bharatiya Drishti very, very unique. And it has been driven by brilliant proponents over millennia. Sri Aurobindo is one of the century. Colonization, though, especially over the last 500 years, has attacked these and disrupted the native mechanisms which we had for knowledge transfer. Each generation, what it used to impart to the next. This used to ensure that the Bharatiya Drishti was not only protected, but created a situation where newer insights could be generated. But our history, our political, social, and economic history of the past 500 years has had huge disastrous consequences. And we have seen appropriation and co-opting of our knowledge systems. So on the global stage, for instance, if India were to meet the Abrahamic civilizations or the Greco-Roman civilization, what began initially as an encounter, right, where the Western systems had awe for the intellectual and the material riches that they found in India, has ended up in a situation where India has been unseated as an equal and only used as a mine from which you can source, extract into the West systems, and then denigrate and discard what has not been taken. That is why, for a post-colonial society such as ours, which has had huge ramifications in every domain, and I must add that even yesterday, I noticed in Pankajji's session where he was talking about the desacralization of our traditions and festivals, all of this has had consequences which we continue to face even post-independence. Our core intellectual property, including the insights and mechanisms to create those insights, have been plundered, disrupted, leading to long-term and immediate consequences. So in the book which is at the heart of our session today, which Rajivji also showed, The Battle for Consciousness Theory, a response to Ken Wilber's appropriation of Sri Aurobindo's work and other Indian thought, Rajivji, I, and our co-author Kundan Singh, what we have done is meticulously document and challenge the digestion and subversion of the work of one of India's greatest sages, Sri Aurobindo. So the book uncovers systematically how Sri Aurobindo's seminal ideas were co-opted by the American theorist Ken Wilber and reformulated into Wilber's own flawed theory, which he called the integral theory. Ken Wilber, by the way, is projected on the same level as Carl Jung and is in fact called the Einstein of consciousness theory in the West, even though what he has done is primarily rebrand Sri Aurobindo's work. So based on extensive research of Rajivji's, it has been nearly a quarter century, we authors in this book aim to show the ramifications and consequences that arise from enhancing Western universalism at the expense of Vedic and other Indian traditions, as seen in the case of Sri Aurobindo's work. Sri Aurobindo has, of course, been one of the greatest rishis of Bharata, and his contribution in building the case for a modern civilizational state has, in fact, been on the millennia-old cultural heritage of the country. If the work of somebody of his caliber can be so actively co-opted, one can only imagine how serious the situation is in which we find ourselves. On the other hand, if the same were to have happened to Western sources of knowledge, it would have been attacked and prosecuted as plagiarism or theft of intellectual property. This book is going to be officially launched on the 21st of August. And in our session today, what I wanted to do was highlight a few key aspects from the book, which will be applicable, in fact, not only to Ken Wilber and Sri Aurobindo, but the larger corpus of such case studies, where Bharatiya civilizational assets are being plundered, making the situation relevant to every serious student and, in fact, every Indian. The patterns which we unearth in the case of Wilber and Sri Aurobindo can, in fact, be transposed to many other domains as a part of the decoloniality process and should inform our generation of students and scholars and provoke much needed debate. So in today's talk, I thought of limiting myself to three major concepts. One of the frameworks, of course, is what Rajivji mentioned, which is digestion, which he came up with several years ago. So what digestion does is there is digestion of the assets and core property, intellectual property of one culture, which is carried out by another culture. You can call the prey and the predator. And this is done under the guise of, trying to integrate, reduce differences. But what happens is gradually dilute and sideline the less dominant culture. So, for instance, at the level of popular culture, India and the West may meet as equals. But at deeper levels, where the core assumptions of a civilization reside, the playing field is tilted. And there is an inherent power asymmetry between the West and the non-West due to political and economic causes of the past couple of centuries. Also, cultural appropriation gives a false impression of equalization. We address this as well. So the dominant civilization, what it does in this process is it dismembers the weaker one into parts from which it picks and chooses and wants to appropriate. The depleted civilization is then museumized as a dead culture and shown as weak and feeble. And what is left out of the prey civilization is destroyed. The second important framework which Rajivji had introduced and which we use extensively to analyze Ken Wilber in this work is the U-turn theory, which he mentioned. Now, the U-turn theory focuses on appropriation by individuals rather than by a school of thought or an institution. What it does is explain the trajectory of Westerners using a model of patterns which describes their typical journeys. There are 5 typical stages of a U-turner, where in stage 1, for instance, they come as a benign disciple, they immerse themselves deeply into the Indian sources and experience the knowledge and understanding in the native tradition framework itself. Then in the second stage, what we have called the decontextualization, the knowledge and the practices of the uniquely Indian systems are reworked as a part of the generic universal heritage, and the specificity of the Indian roots are erased. So at this stage, what are basically the original discoveries of, for instance, India, are repackaged and relocated as something found in the Greek or the Roman or any of the Western civilizations. The third stage is the recontextualization, where the Indian knowledge which has been taken out, is recontextualized in the Judeo-Christian or the Western frameworks. So what then they do is they introduce patents, trademarks, other claims to ownership. And now this retooled Indian heritage is actually presented as rooted in Western theory. So what has happened is the arrow of direction has been forcefully changed. The source tradition has been depleted and now repackaged as inherited from the West. Stage 4 is what Rajivji calls the arson, where the source traditions are miscontextualized and demonized. So not only have you depleted them, you have also mischaracterized them, right? To make them seem as inferior and not worthy of being positive cultural assets. Now, the residue of what has been left behind after anything useful that has been taken out, it will be denigrated, as misguided, flawed, or even worse, as dangerous and toxic. In stage 5, what happens is the bodies of knowledge which have been repackaged are exported back to India in Western terminologies. It is also at this stage that sometimes even elitist Indians become proxies for Western culture and join the Western grand narrative as sepoys. Now, we use both the theories of digestion and U-turn in this book to study Ken Wilber and model how he has transitioned in his work. He initially was very respectful of Sri Aurobindo and other Indian sources in his initial phases of writings. And over time, he has been writing extensively. Over time, what he has done is downgraded the importance, first banished them to footnotes, and then eventually completely dropping acknowledgement and attribution in his writings. Ken Wilber has been a prolific author. He's been writing since 1970s. So in his earliest material, he's coming across as somebody who's trying to synthesize the profound realizations of the Eastern knowledge systems, especially from the work of Sri Aurobindo, to the Western world of materialism. So he wants to synthesize the two. Over the course of the next few decades, though, he co-opts a few very key ideas from Sri Aurobindo on evolution, on how consciousness is involuted, how humanity as a new cultural, how humanity can progress. All of these are taken away from Sri Aurobindo's work and repackaged as Wilber's own. In our book, what we have done is we have systematically unpacked this, even shown a one-to-one mapping of passages, and discussed how all of this has drastically changed the Aurobindonian discourse since the late 1990s, which has also failed to counter this appropriation. The third aspect which we use in this book, which I wanted to highlight, is one of the key frameworks introduced by Rajiv Ji, which is synthetic versus integral unity. For example, when one examines a plant, right, one sees a kind of unity which runs through all aspects of the plant, whether it is the seed or the soil or the sunlight. So you see a sort of an organic whole which is there in the ecosystem. Now, this wholeness is represented even in the factors which contribute to the plant's life cycle. There is unity in the constituent parts, the functionality, and even the final creation. The unity which characterizes this kind of a system is what we define as integral unity. In comparison, think of a man-made object such as a car. Now, in a car, every part is assembled and forged by bringing together distinct elements externally, with the explicit purpose of creating an instrument which serves a particular purpose. This kind of unity is what we have defined as synthetic unity. So the defining principle of the integral unity is that the whole alone exists. Even the parts which make up the whole are correlative to it. Whereas in the case of synthetic unity, the fundamental principle is that of independent and separate existence of parts that make up the whole at an essential level. Western science has had tremendous success so far in creating technological progress using the principles of synthetic unity. Yet, it has faced challenges when one considers the emergence of consciousness from something made of matter, such as brain. Now, the approach of reductionism, which is a signature of synthetic unity, where phenomena and processes are studied by breaking them down into fundamental parts, contrasts with that of the integral unity, where the premise is that it is from the ultimate that all phenomena emerge. So while Western neuroscience has studied the emergence of consciousness, the Dharmic school of thought believes in consciousness being the source of all manifestations. So now these two major schools of thought, that is the Dharmic and the Western, are very important to understand and study from this perspective. Sri Aurobindo has been one of the greatest exponents of integral unity in Dharmic system. His mammoth work has spanned studies of Vedas, Upanishads, the Shastras, Yoga, Sankhya, the Gita, and more importantly, through his own experiences as a yogi. He has considered conditions for unifying different approaches to the same ultimate reality. Now, the use of a synthetic lens, on the other hand, such as what Wilber does, to dissect a system which has integral unity to begin with, is by definition going to produce a distorted view. Even worse, when one combines concepts from different systems with no inbuilt unity, one produces disharmony and though on the surface it can be made to look unified. So in the book, we study how Ken Wilber synthesizes without realizing this fundamental difference and produces flawed ideas. This difference between integral and synthetic unity can in fact be applied to many other examples of Westerners' works. And that is something which I feel the students present here should genuinely explore. The final aspect which I wanted to highlight today is one of the examples of consequences of the digestion process which we track in the book. Among the many outstanding contributions of Sri Aurobindo, apart from the towering work he has done in consciousness studies, what he has written extensively is on the need for Indians to be more active karma yogis, especially in the decades of the freedom movement and immediately post-independence. Using lofty and escapist ideas to avoid facing reality was anathema to the sage. Indians have historically been very advanced in the outer realms of man's life, equally as the rishis pursued the most fundamental questions of man's existence. Right from the times of the Sindhu-Saraswati civilization to the pre-colonial era, Indians have demonstrated materialistic, artistic, economic competence to unbelievable heights. The pursuit of excellence in the material world has always been in harmony with inner spiritual quests. One of the long-lasting consequences of colonization and the digestion process is that Bharata's spiritual pursuits alone are cited by colonizers, and India is distorted. The image of India is distorted to being one mainly of world negating. So this has created an image of a dependent and servile people and was projected in opposition to the colonizers' own self-image of being a dominant civilization destined to rule over others. This ethos continued to be adopted even in post-independent India, and has led to overemphasis on certain selected aspects of Hindu texts without looking at the complete picture provided. Sri Aurobindo addressed this issue extensively in his own writings. He repeatedly emphasized that, for instance, Advaita Vedanta and the Buddhist approaches alone are not the focus of Indian spirituality, but a dynamic, worldly engagement and mastery with the true hallmarks of the native Bharatiya mind. Unfortunately, even in the decades since Sri Aurobindo's passing, even contemporary scholars of our times, such as Wilber, continue to project India in a very limiting and negative light. This lets them conveniently dip into India's contributions while doing away with basic attributions, as they have altered Bharata's self-image to their convenience. We take on this theme very prominently in the book and hope that the purva-paksha and responses that we have provided in taking on the leading proponent of Western consciousness movement provides a template for others to study and apply in their own chosen domains as well. I thank the organizers for giving Rajiv ji and me this opportunity to present some of our work, especially in a place which has been founded in Sri Aurobindo's influence. We hope the book finds readership in the audience here today, and I must add it is presently already available online, and we look forward to hearing more and listening to feedback on it. Thank you.